And it's BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. Hello, everybody, and today is Wednesday, time for the AMA. That's the Ask Me Anything, where I respond to your question and comments. We go through the material together and we have a discussion. Firstly, I would like to give a shout out to YouTube user Andrew WVA, who asked the question that's going to be the title episode for today's topic, and simply asking what I thought about the recent news discussing the disappearance of Amelia Earhart from 1937. Amelia Earhart was born in 1897 and she was pronounced dead in 1939 in absentia. She is most famous for being the first woman to try and circumnavigate the globe in an airplane. And since I've been doing a little bit of reading about this subject, I found that more or less some people had the claim to global circumnavigation via airplane before Amelia Earhart, but what she wanted to do was she wanted to do it at an equatorial level. So it's actually going around the circumference of the Earth. And that's why she's often referred to as the first person to attempt this. Now, I am an absolute newcomer to this. I'm absolutely somebody who is just getting started in this field. And my initial impressions were that this type of research heavily reminded me of some of the other true crime cases that are discussed here on Black Box Online Radio, most notably the Zodiac Killer and Jack the Ripper, where you have this community of researchers that are very dedicated to their own theories. And as somebody put it on a recent episode in the comments section, just saying that it's almost as if people are approaching this like a debate club where they've chosen a side and now they're looking at the evidence that supports their side. But a lot of people are just thinking, now, wait a second, these are mysteries. This is true crime stuff. These are just encountering the unexplained. It's not necessarily, it is. Isn't even about which side you want to play. It's about the facts. It's about the truth. It's about what actually happened. So Amelia Earhart had this plan in 1937 to circumnavigate the globe via airplane, as well as with her navigator. And they were doing pretty well, actually. It seems that they've almost made it, but the hardest stretch would have been the Pacific. When I've been looking at the maps about how Amelia Earhart would have traveled, it would have been going across the United States of America, then to Africa, then to Southern Asia, and then ultimately to the Pacific. The Pacific Ocean would have absolutely been the most challenging part because of all of the different islands and how far apart they are. Now, what happened to Amelia Earhart? She has simply vanished. And there are going to be a lot of theories out there involving aliens, wormholes, portals, encounters with the unexplained. And I'm not even going to talk about that until perhaps the very end, but I don't personally believe that type of stuff. So, one of the reasons why this is brought up a lot in the news is because of the thumbnail for this video. A research team has claimed that they were able to use sonar to try and pinpoint the exact location of Amelia Earhart's airplane. They found an image in the ocean which resembles that of an airplane. And my absolute first take on the subject was when I saw the side by side comparison of Amelia Earhart's airplane and the sonar image that they had found from the bottom of the ocean, I was just thinking, oh my goodness, this looks extremely similar. It's the one that's used for the thumbnail of this episode. But then upon closer inspection, I began to notice a few things, and I didn't even want to think them. I'm not talking to anybody about this. I'm just watching this stuff online. I didn't even want to think this, but I was like, now the closer I look at this, the more I begin to think that this is almost just something that's a little bit different. In the sonar image, the wings are definitely more at a curved or pointing backwards, let's say, not curved, but the wings point backward, as well as the tail wing of the plane. All of that stuff is definitely almost in a type of different position than that of Amelia Earhart's plane. And some people might be just thinking, plane crash, wreckage, bottom of the ocean for how many years? What are we talking about? 90 years or something like that? Almost 90 years at the bottom of the ocean. That could be altering it. But I happened to encounter an interview with an individual named Richard Gillespie, who goes by Rick, spelled R-I-C. And he's written two books about the disappearance of Amelia Earhart. And again, he is a very passionate researcher. And I was just so glad that I wasn't seeing things, or I felt like my untrained eyes had no idea what they were doing, because he brought up that exact same point, saying that these are differences between the sonar image and the photos of Amelia Earhart's airplane, the wings pointing backward, the tail wing pointing backward. And he has also said in his decades following this mystery that sometimes they find these images at the bottom of the ocean and they look at them and it turns out they're not even airplanes. I mean, the sonar image absolutely looks like an airplane to me, but he said There's even a chance that it could be coral and not even metal. Now, a lot of people are wondering, if Amelia Earhart crash landed in the Pacific, what happened to the wreckage? And in this interview that I was watching with Rick Gillespie, which was made available on Fox News, he talked about one possible theory. And this is going to be a set of theories that I have found to be the most widely discussed in the entire story involving Amelia Earhart. And that is that she could have landed or crash landed at a place called Gardner Island, which is now part of the country known as Kiribati. It was formerly known as the Gilbert Islands. It's part of the Phoenix Island group. And I learned all about this stuff only recently. But, and yes, Gardner Island has also since been renamed. But if she had crash landed there, then the airplane that Amelia Earhart was flying, by his own description, was more or less an aluminum eggshell. It was not something that would be comparable to that of a freighter or a different type of naval ship. It was an aluminum eggshell. If it had crash landed, then there are two major possibilities. One of them is that Amelia and her navigator were just killed on impact. There's a crash, and then the airplane was fragmented because of the crash, and then there were just a big scattering of the metal pieces. And there was a naval ship that was sent from Pearl Harbor to come to Gardner Island in the Pacific Ocean, but it took at least 7 days to get there. And he said that that would have been enough time for the changes in the tides to bring the metal aircraft into the ocean, and it could have been broken apart, battered by the elements. And that's why they have not been able to identify an exact location of Amelia Earhart's aircraft. Now, all of that could be wrong. And as previously stated, I am somewhat of an untrained eye. It could mean that this new research team that has identified the sonar, who has used sonar to identify this shape underwater, may have actually found her aircraft. But that's one possibility, that they're just crash landing. Amelia and her navigator are dead, and then the tide pulls the aircraft out into the ocean and it sinks and fragments. Now, what would be the other possibility? That it was not a crash landing, but Amelia Earhart flies in her airplane. They have to make an emergency landing at Gardner Island simply because they ran out of fuel, and they were able to get out and to actually stay on the island for 1 or 2 days or something. And it's more or less something like Tom Hanks in the movie Castaway, if you ever saw that, where Tom Hanks is talking to his volleyball Wilson, and he's saying, I'd rather take my chances out on the ocean than to stay here and die maybe 2 or 3 days, and they're not able to get in contact with anyone. And Jay is here. Good morning. And Evie is here. May she rest in peace. Thank you so much, Evie, and thank you, Jay. And just that maybe her and the navigator attempted to leave the island in some type of raft. Maybe they even had one, and that was unsuccessful. And they were lost at sea. That could have also been a possibility, and that would explain why they have not found any human remains. Now, there was something that was brought up on one of the channels. Oh, was it Mr. Creepypasta, I believe, when he was saying that one section of Google Earth was actually able to pull up the word help that was written out on Gardner Island. I don't like that at all. I don't even think that some type of writing in sandstone or writing on even rocks would be visible from Google Earth if it had been created in 1937. Wrathchild is here. Good morning. Good morning to you too, Wrathchild. So I have a lot of as you see, a lot of skepticism about those things, but I do think that it's somewhat of a defendable theory that Amelia Earhart's aircraft could have crash landed near this place called Gardner Island. What would be some of the alternatives? Let's look at them. One of them is that the Marshall Islands were under the control of Japan at the time, and a Japanese boater ship came down from Saipan, and that they simply either saw the crash, they went and investigated, and then they found these two Americans, and they kidnapped them, or they took them aboard their ship, and they were being held as hostages, and then that was the end of it. They might have lived out their days in some type of labor camp. And there's even a more complicated theory that Amelia Earhart was actually able to get out of the labor camp, and then she just decided to live a different life under a different name. Maybe she's traumatized or something to the effect, and that's more or less what people are alluding to. However, the evidence that supports this theory is mostly done like hearsay, or it's just based on some stories that people said, well, I saw two Americans, in the company of the Japanese people back in 1937. I'm also not extremely impressed by that. And that also begs the question as to what happened to the aircraft. It could be the thing about the tides are pulling it into the sea and going underwater, and then it's disintegrating. There was also one theory that I read that somebody had said that they thought that the aircraft was actually towed by the Japanese by this ship from Saipan, and then they were headed toward the Marshall Islands and then perhaps the Japanese mainland. One of the more outrageous theories that I encountered was somebody believed that Amelia Earhart actually returned to the United States of America and she wanted to live under a different name. She maybe wanted to change her life, and she went on to become a banker in the state of New Jersey and was actually very successful at that. And again, I'm not the biggest fan of those types of theories because I just think that they are more or less based on conjecture. And even though the theory involving Gardner Island seems to be heavily focused on conjecture, I think that it's more about a type of conjecture that is supported with certain elements of fact. That's in the general vicinity of where her plane last was crossing the Pacific Ocean, and an uninhabited island. And if you ever do any like reading up on this, Mr. JSV is here. Hey, how you doing? Then you will see that there was an attempt made by the British to start a settlement on Gardner Island, but it was mostly scrapped and evacuated. And I mean, I gonna have to go back and double check the dates on about when the last person was there. However, it appears that they had this plan to more or less spread settlements around the Phoenix Island group because they thought that there was some overpopulation in the Gilbert Islands, so they were spreading the people around, and then ultimately they just couldn't distribute the supplies. But one of them is actually called Canton Island, spelled Canton. It used to be spelled Kanton, and they had a settlement that was going for just decades. And there was even an article that came out not too long ago in the Guardian. Oh, by not too long ago, I mean about like maybe 10 or 13 years ago, something like that. And they said that there were still families that were living on the islands that were supposed to be in touch with the British, expecting to receive food, and the food was 3 months late. And just some people on a yacht happened to be passing by and were able to give them food. So there are going to be some people in the area, but not an enormous amount. Now, I think that's just going to simply require more investigations, more analysis, and more expeditions to find out if this sonar image that they have found from the bottom of the sea could actually be Amelia Earhart's plane. And I would also hope that the researchers who have attached their names to theories and to books would openly accept the discoveries with open arms. Now, because this is the Wednesday show, the AMA, the Ask Me Anything, where any subject is fair game, and I will answer any question that I can to the best of my ability. We'll go through the material together and we'll have a discussion. At this time, I would like to open the chat up to anything. You can put your questions in the comment section down below. And there is one that was sent to me privately by an individual named Adam Ivester, who runs the YouTube channel Let's Go Sleuthing. It used to be called Real Zodiac Killer Revealed. And Adam had a question about the hair checklist. I talk a lot about serial killers on this channel, and if you're curious about that subject, you can hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps out. And you can also go over to buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxnid88, and that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. So as far as this question about the hair checklist, he said that there's this way that psychologists and psychiatrists examine people for psychopathy. And the hair checklist is a 20-point checklist that's based on a score of 0, 1, or 2. So the maximum score is 40. And if you score 30 out of 40 or higher, then you're deemed to be a psychopath. It requires a little bit of interpretation. That's why they say you need a trained examiner. But what Adam's question was, could a checklist be developed to determine whether or not a person was a serial killer, or could people be trained to recognize the traits of a serial killer, just by examining someone, and even like just by your own assessment? Could you train yourself to learn that with a certain degree of accuracy? And I think that's an excellent question. My response was, I think that would be extremely difficult because not all serial killers are the same. Number one, psychopathy is a set of behaviors. Like if you just have this behavior and then you extremely have this behavior, then you get points on the checklist. With serial killers, some of them are driven by psychopathic tendencies and unhealed childhood traumas, and other ones are driven by calculating reasons. Like there's a specific reason why they're doing this. Think about the person who's trying to create the criminal masterpiece. Think about the person who is trying to play some type of sick and twisted game. And maybe there's even a different element involved, like the ritualistic cult, so to speak. that begs the question about how much would you call that a serial killer? But I do think it's very insightful. And my honest response was, I think that you could get a lot better at trying to predict whether or not someone would be a serial killer by examining the personality traits, but I'm not 100% convinced that you could have the same type of method. I saw a video on YouTube just a couple hours ago that I thought was really interesting about this subject when it said that there's the term out there, incurable psychopath. Now, why is that? Charlie is here. Hey, Charlie. Incurable psychopath. Why would a psychopath be incurable? One of the biggest reasons is because the psychopath does not want to be cured. Why not? Two words, food and fuel. They almost view the the psychopath almost views the person that is empathetic as a type of fuel that they're going to just be putting into their bodies, and they want to prey on this person. And that brings us to the third one, fool. Fuel, food, fool. And they think that empathetic people are fools. They're foolish. So they're fueling their destructive tendencies. They're food for them to prey on, and they are fools for being caught up in these types of empathetic thought patterns and empathetic emotional patterns. And they think that they're stronger and more and superior and smarter because they are psychopathic. And I thought that was just a really interesting take on the subject. However, I simply just take a step back and say certain psychopaths are incurable. Wrathchild says, have you thought about doing a UFO UAP episode and the latest news on it? I would love to respond to some of that. I mean, if you have any kind of new things that are in the news, Wrathchild, you can post them in the comment section down below. I've done one UFO live stream here where I was talking about some of the famous stories that I had heard of, and I was just kind of putting that one on the back burner, for example. I mean, I haven't looked at UFOs too closely since then. Now, when I was looking at the story about Amelia Earhart, the UFO stories were off the charts. I mean, all types of things. And it's not only UFOs, it's also things like interdimensional travel, vortexes, that type of stuff. And a lot of these things get incorporated into the Bermuda Triangle theories as well. When I was back in college, I must have been 18 years old just because of the room that I was living in. I met somebody who said that, have you heard of the Bermuda Triangle? And I'm like, well, yes, of course. Do you know what's happening with the Bermuda Triangle? And I'm like, no. And what she said was, it's a bomb testing zone. It is an explosive testing zone for different military organizations, different ones from different countries, and they are testing things off by blowing up airplanes and destroying them in the Bermuda Triangle. And I'm like, that's some vicious stuff. That's some sick and twisted stuff. When you just look at aliens and interdimensional beings, that doesn't sound so bad. That, people are just flying along and then they get caught up in a vortex or something like that. All right. That's almost seems rather innocent because we don't necessarily know what the aliens are going to do. Super Strike is here. Hey, Super Strike, how you doing? So with the Bermuda Triangle, I honestly think that perhaps it's just an area of the ocean and airspace that is not closely monitored and that people are not being able to keep track on what happened. With Amelia Earhart, the same thing. Absolutely the same thing. We're going back to 1937, and then you have these types of flights that people are trying to do to circumnavigate the globe without the internet, without satellite telephones and so on, and it's just not closely monitored. And that's what happened to Amelia's plane, lost somewhere in the Pacific Ocean. And I mean, Rick Gillespie may have been onto something when he said that the plane could have crashed, fragmented, and just the wreckage would have gone throughout the waters in a span of 7 days before the naval ship from Hawaii was able to reach there. But here's something that comes up with a lot of questions about aliens, air travel, space travel, all of that. And that is that how did people go from the Wright brothers in the early 1900s to the moon in 1969? And yes, I believe that we landed on the moon. How were they able to do that? And I mean, this isn't my own original observation. I read this in the comment section on Facebook once, the best place to get your education. And what somebody said, we didn't go to the moon in airplanes. We went to the moon in rockets, or we used rockets to go to the moon. Rockets were around for not only centuries, but also millennia, thousands of years. I mean, you must have heard the stories about the Chinese setting off rockets, around the turn of the first and second millennium thereabouts. Yes, I mean, that's just a completely different concept. And if you watch Stanley Kubrick's movie 2001: A Space Odyssey, he even has an introductory scene where there are these early humanoids, which just look more or less like gorillas, taking objects and throwing them into the air. And what you're supposed to think about is it's not even 1,000 years or 2,000 years old. This is something that would have happened for millions of years. And very simply, just it's a continuation of the process. So by 1969, it's not necessarily something that is so crazy to think that people were able to make it to the moon. And I might have to do a full episode on the moon landing because there's so many different points to this that I think get overlooked about these types of moon landing hoaxes, and just the stuff that kind of proves that we actually did go to the moon, let alone, I mean, I could talk about photographs and so on, but people always just say that the photographs are faked. Whereas with a story like Amelia Earhart, I really don't think that a lot of people are trying to spread disinfo and entertain some type of wacky conspiracy theory because they're trying to say the government is planning on destroying us. Instead, I think that this is more of just less an unsolved mystery that is rather innocent. Someone was trying to do something very brave and to be a pioneer. And that's what they say about Amelia Earhart when you read basic stuff about her. This might have even been on the infographics channel, which, I mean, had an entertaining video about her. I don't know how accurate it was, but it was entertaining when they said that what she wanted to do was just to be a trailblazer. She wanted to challenge things, and that she wanted to be someone who could do things that they didn't really expect from women. Super Strike has a comment that says, "Heard the recent news about the latest search for Earhart's plane. It's worth looking into further from what I heard." Absolutely, absolutely. I think it's worth looking into further. But here's the problem. All we can see is just this blurry sonar image. I mean, maybe it's not even a plane that belongs to Amelia Earhart. Maybe it's a different type of aircraft. It could be something to that effect. And that's the one that's used for the thumbnail of this video. But overall, though, I think that there are conspiracy theories that get connected to the world of aviation, and one of them was just written out again on Facebook from somebody that was talking about DB Cooper. And Drew Beeson is the author of the book Paratrooper of Fortune, which talks all about Ted B. Braden as a DB Cooper suspect. And what he said was that, imagine this: Ted Braden was ex-CIA, and could they have had a CIA operative do the DB Cooper heist, and then it was all done to have increased security measures for airplanes and just a reason or demonstrating a method as to how and why they would want to have these things going on, like how and why they would want to put in these types of preventative measures, how and why they would want to put in these types of increased security things which might violate some type of civil liberties or get somebody angry. Like, well, DB Cooper brought a bomb on the plane. And believe it or not, that's a conspiracy theory. I don't think it's a completely crazy conspiracy theory, though. I mean, I can follow the logic because Ted Braden is actually a strong DB Cooper suspect, as well as someone who had connections to the CIA, and he was an extremely skilled paratrooper. Now, the next part of that theory is something that I have to question a little bit, and saying that in reward, as compensation for committing the skyjacking, could the CIA have then recompensated Ted Braden $200,000 and laundered the money that DB Cooper had? Now, that's where things get tricky. How would that theory explain the 3 stacks of money that were found at Tina Bar years later that actually came from the DB Cooper skyjacking? Could that not just demonstrate that, well, if the money were laundered, why is it ending up at Tina Bar in more or less the middle of nowhere? So I have a few doubts about that one. And Super Strike says, hopefully it doesn't end up being some sort of glitch. You're referring to Amelia Earhart's plane, right? Okay, so here's my take on that. This happens all the time. There are all types of glitches. And, it's very saddening, but these things do happen because when we look at some of the mysteries on Mars, for example, they used to say that there was this face that was carved in the rock on Mars. And then once they had stronger photographic technology, then they realized that it wasn't that face that was carved at all. It's just a mountain. And there were just these blurry images that were like shadows or just low quality photography because we're photographing Mars and we're here on Earth. These things happen all the time. Or some people believe that they can capture spiritual energy on film. Like if they're taking a photograph and then there are going to be these orbs of light that come from the spirits. And the skeptical response is just, That's water vapor. That's the light reflecting off of water vapor, and sometimes it's going to create these orbs of, well, I mean, that's what they are, light reflecting off of the water. And you can find that they're very simple and skeptical answers to a lot of these things. But I would really hope that they've actually found something there of substance. And right now, I think this is going to be a short episode. I would just like to turn it over to you guys. Do you have any final questions that you would like to ask? Anything else that you would like covered in this episode? I know it's going to be one of the shorter AMAs, but I just wanted to give my honest take on the subject about Amelia Earhart. I think the theory about the crash landing on Gardner Island is very solid. If I had to go with one, I would probably go with that one. And also, this can be your takeaway. When I've been watching content in various corners of YouTube and reading different articles, it seems that most people are looking at that as a strong theory. And these other things about being abducted by the Japanese, they're not necessarily at the forefront of these discussions. They talk about it because it's somewhat of a widely discussed theory, but that's mostly it. And Super Strike says the face on Mars is like seeing a face in the cloud. The human mind loves to make patterns and images out of things. Yeah, absolutely. But even I am forced to admit that the sonar image of the airplane underwater, that does resemble an airplane. It doesn't look like Amelia Earhart's airplane. It looks like a different shape. But and if anybody has anything else about Amelia Earhart, I would like to just give the floor to you. Other than that, I would say one more time, anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box. And there is always BlackBoxNid88 over on Instagram. And I will see you over there. Until next time.